Great Wednesday and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing real well, King. It's as always, my day gets even better when I get to spend some time talking to you. So happy New Year to you as well. And it's great to be here.
Absolutely. It's a blessing to be here, and it's a great way to get things started off. It's New Year, still, 3 days into the new year, 4 days into the new year, I should say.
Yeah.
And, start off with my gratitude. I'm grateful for life, health, the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, sound mind. Mother still alive and has sound mind. And as you say, the roof over your head, heat, electricity, food, and then water. And then more importantly, just the blessing to be present to experience life and all its wonders.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow. There's nothing left. I'll just say ditto. No, not. You covered the full spectrum. But the things that I really zero in on as well are, just the blessings of having indoor plumbing and the refrigerator that works with mostly fresh food in it, and the ability to go out and get reasonably healthy food pretty much whenever I want. And I know that I'm better off than 90% of the people on the planet just with those two things, the plumbing and the available food. And as you say too, just to have, as far as we can tell, healthy and sound mind and body. we could be out of our minds and just not know it, but I think we're pretty healthy. So I'm just grateful for basic things that are really easy to take for granted nowadays. So I'm there with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we begin into what I show, I've said this on multiple occasions, and I want to reiterate it again. And that is the importance of, building with someone you align with. And I love when I speak to people who have that grateful spirit,
Hmm.
And that to me is, I think, one of the greatest ways to connect with somebody is just talking about what you're grateful for. And they talk about the little things in life, such as, I mean, they're big things, but when I say little, because we tend to take them for granted, your life, your health, seeing, hearing. When you meet someone who's on that path, that to me is a great connecting thread. I like to say connecting thread is what I believe when you connect with somebody. There's threads that can be created, and they strengthen the connection. And if you have several of them, then that's when the connection can really grow and take off, and the relationship can really prosper.
Yeah.
So I just want to reiterate that again. So uh, with that being said, how about you let us know what we're going to be talking about this year? I mean, today, being a new year.
Yeah. Thanks, King. So, what we agreed to do today was just a kind of a brief overview of what you and I have been doing for really the last 6 months. We started this in June of 2022, and we've been speaking about a book that wasn't out yet when we began doing this, but it's entitled Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And we've been speaking about the book, which I'll unpack that, kind of review what we've been doing in just a moment, in the context of fully human connections. In other words, what you just spoke to is those folks that you can really attune with or feel you're attuned to, and have these fully human connections where, you can be an adult and you can be honest and you can disagree, and still be okay, with each other. So what the book addresses, and again, we're speaking to this in terms of folks who may not have, tuned in before, and even for those who have, just to kind of address the high level view of the book. By American Shadow, the collective national shadow of America, we're referring to those aspects of the tree that many Americans deny or make believe aren't there. And shadow, in a psychological standpoint, is that very thing where an individual, it's a part of me that I don't know is there, I'm blind to. So we're speaking about that collectively on a national level. more to the point, we're arguing that the collective historical shadow of the United States manifests through an unhealthy embodiment or iteration of masculine energy. And so I'll just tease apart the masculine and the feminine, because these are the things that we've been speaking about. When we say masculine energy tends toward individualism, justice, wisdom, stepping into a sense of agency, getting things done. And feminine energy tends more towards relationship, community, compassion, and mercy. And for those of you who are listening carefully, you can see that both masculine and feminine energies are wonderful. They're healthy. There's nothing inherently wrong with justice or mercy or intimacy or solitude or, excuse me, wisdom or compassion. But the shadow of the country historically manifested through unhealthy iterations of this masculine individualism, agency, sense of justice, primarily for very exclusive groups. And historically in the United States, that meant more or less wealthy, cisgendered white guys. Now I'm painting with a broad brush because we've been doing this for 6 months, but that's generally true. And then we spoke about some specific examples of it. We took a close look at the history of women, and specifically the fear of the feminine, subjugation of women. We took a close look at the history of Native Americans, and specifically the betrayal and slaughter of Native Americans by the European settlers and colonizers, and eventually the United States federal government and some of the state militias as well. A brief history of African Americans, beginning with the enslavement by Europeans of Africans coming to what we now call the Americas, and continuing with slavery in the United States, and with the end of slavery, the movement into, excuse me, almost essential lynchings of Jim Crow and oppression of African Americans and more generally people of color. We took a close look at the Vietnam War and the, again, subjugation and dehumanization of the Vietnamese people, pretty much from almost immediately after World War II through the mid-1970s. And in terms of the large examples from the chapters in the book, we then took a look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan post 9/11. We also spoke about the denial of climate change and global warming, America's culture of violence, our tendency to privilege money and things over the lives of human beings, and some other issues that we dealt with as well, all within the context of promoting a more fully human sense of connection with every human being. And we're speaking specifically about the US, but what we're saying applies in unique ways as well to other countries, but we're speaking about America, and how we might better see each other in more fully human, connected, excuse me, perspective. And what we'll probably be doing, and I'm projecting this now, in the coming conversation is taking a look at some of the questions we can ask and practices we can engage in order to really grow into this more fully human sense of connection with all of us, not just some selected few. And the last thing I'll say, because we're talking, right now as the new Congress is trying to select a Speaker of the House, and having a real hard time doing it. They went through 3 votes yesterday, and the minority representative, minority in the sense of the Democrats are a minority and Republicans are a majority in the House, but the minority representative, Hakeem Jeffries, who won't become Speaker because there aren't enough votes, has received more votes in each of the 3 votes than any of the majority candidates, who will eventually maybe, maybe there won't be a Speaker of the House. I don't know, but who might eventually get together and nominate one of their own. So the divisiveness and the lack of a really fully human connection um, is really evident in one of the governing bodies of the United States federal government right now. So we have a lot of work to do. Yeah.
We do. We do. What's interesting, and I mentioned this to you before, that I was part of a uh, 3-part series called Changing the Conversations that was put on by one of the largest Jewish groups in Baltimore City called the Associate. And it was changing the conversations mainly between blacks and Jews. And then, specifically white European Jews and black Americans. And what's interesting from that, and it really shows how people have to begin, and this is what I advocate to what you're saying, that don't judge a person, judge their behavior, right? Because, people, depending on the situation, their behaviors can be different and maybe not necessarily warranted, but can be understood why a person may act in a certain way. And they might not necessarily define that person his whole life because of that one act they did, their behavior, that one act. But anyway, where I'm going with this is the last session, again, they set us in these tables, maybe about 60 people in a room and about 6 tables. And they put us about maybe 10 to a table, 7 to 10 people, depending on the size of the audience. And I just happened to be at a table, and they change the tables each session. I just happened to be at a table with a gentleman who is the actual executive director of the Associate. And so we were talking and looking for how we were going to move forward from these conversations, because obviously the associate did not want to keep moving things forward because that wasn't the purpose. It was to get, engaged and inspire and get us conversing, and then we can, as leaders, take it from there. Now, what I found to be very surprising, welcoming, and just a lot about his character was that, and I happened to be one of 2 black persons at the table. It's predominantly the room was about maybe out of the 60, it definitely was 40 white and maybe 20 blacks. So it's definitely a minority of situation. And listening to the people who organized the event, they said they couldn't get a lot of blacks to attend. They just wasn't interested in having that conversation. They were trying to figure out what's the agenda, what's the purpose, why should we have these conversations? And where I'm going with this, to make a long story short, was that the gentleman at the table who was executive director didn't know he was executive director. He didn't seem very pompous and didn't have that kind of, I'm the man and, bow down to me ego. He was very humble, and he made a point to say, listen, I'm going to start this by giving you my direct number to me and several other people at the table. And most people at the table he knew besides me and this other black gentleman. And he gave me his number, not his email address, not his card, his actual cell number. And we talked after that, and we had lunch for the first time yesterday. And and I didn't realize this gentleman, someone who's been running this organization for 20 years. And so by saying that, and you understand the culture and the mores of Baltimore City, that basically financially, the 2 power sources in Baltimore City are the Jewish organizations and the Catholic organizations. So someone who runs one of the largest Jewish organizations pretty much knows any and everybody, especially who's been in that position for 20 years. And listening to him say that he just really wants to help me and my goals, and really, because my goals are of a higher purpose. It's not just my individual goals to make me more money and make my business successful for my own personal interests. My goals have a higher purpose that impacts more other people. We talked about that before. And I'm saying all this to say that he was really sincere and open with this. And he's like, let me know what I can do, and was generally interested in asking me questions about how he can help, laid out what he could do. And I just was really impressed by that. And one last thing I want to say before I close was that he made the point to say that he had talked to other so-called black leaders, and most of the time when they have these conversations with black leaders, they the pushback was, just give me your money, but I don't want to necessarily hear your thoughts and your opinions. And I'm thinking, as we talk about becoming more fully human, I don't see how people can really expect another human being just to act in that capacity, even though they're trying to reach across the aisle or they're trying to extend friendship or establish trust. And you're saying, well, I don't really want your relationship. I just really want your money because I feel as though you're privileged. And because you're privileged, I'm entitled to have your money because I was marginalized, oppressed, and all the things that you talked about in your book as it relates to Black people specifically. So I just wanted to really talk about that because that to me, as we that's why we stress the goal or stress the importance on the show about becoming more fully human. Because when you become more fully human and you see yourself, and I told him that I see you as a human being. I don't see you as a Jewish man. I hope you don't see me as a black man, because I know if we do see each other with those labels, then we bring all the baggage and the trauma of what all that is, because now we represent the group. So I'm gonna look at you and judge you about what I believe other Jewish men have done to me and my people, and you may judge me by what you feel other Black people have done to you and what you see on the news or whatever the context is. When we see each other as human beings, first and foremost, then we begin to build with each other. All that baggage, all that energy never even gets created. And then we're able to be actually have a great conversation, which we did, and looking forward to doing some great building together.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you shared that, and and that's at that's at the core of what you and I have been. It reminds me of, and we've mentioned this in the past, in one of her writings, Bell Hooks, and I think the book was Outlaw Culture, spoke pretty much to that point where she basically said, if you've got this group over here fighting against, their oppressors, and that group over there fighting against their oppressors, and that group over there fighting against their oppressors, and all they're concerned with is their own group and getting some kind of justice or reparations or whatever, might be appropriate. She said, until we work from an ethic of love and we want to end all domination, all oppression for everyone, we're never going to get anywhere. And that gets back to exactly what you're saying, is when you see another human being, and this is a developmental move, which it takes, in my experience, it takes time to get there. Not to make believe you don't see skin pigmentation or height or weight, or you don't hear an accent or whatever it happens to be, but just to remember that behind that appearance or that sound is another human being. In other words, we want to get to being species centric, as opposed to ethnocentric or race centric or gender centric or whatever it happens to be. And we tend to, in my experience and in what I've read and the people that have taught me, we're all pretty much born, depending on whether you believe in karma and reincarnation, but we come into the world as more or less blank slates. Not there are things that go on because of genetics, and there can be trauma in the womb if the mother is in a difficult situation or if she drinks and smokes and all of that. But as an infant, we don't come out biased. We don't come out, with a tendency to preference, one color or sound over another. We learn that as kids from our cultures of origin, and not just from our parents, but our teachers and our communities. And then the work we have to do, unfortunately, is to unlearn all of that. And so that group that you're talking about, in Baltimore City, we bring in the the Jewish congregations and the Black congregations together. And I'm saying congregations not religiously necessarily, but just in big meaning of that word. is an essential move for all of us to sit down and be in conversation together. And it's hard work because of all of the acculturation, because of all of the history, and because of those people who, as you said, okay, just give me, I need your help, give me your money, but I'm not really interested in anything else. I'll take the funding. Um, it's just a reminder of how much work we have to do. And my bias is, this is an oversimplification, but it's part of a bigger picture, is kind of what you and I are doing. But I feel that my obligation, besides being a writer and a teacher and a coach, is I need to show up every day in my life and every time I encounter another human being an exemplar for what I'm talking about. In other words, practicing what I'm preaching. Um, and
Integrity.
yeah, just show up as that thing, um, imperfectly as I might manifest it, because I haven't had any perfect. I've had a couple of days that would kind of make me felt almost perfect, but I kind of I kind of know that perfection isn't where I'm living. But to be able to get up every day and try it, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world, or my life is my message, and that's what we're called to do. Um, and so you just get up and you do it again. You do it every day. And it's easy to do. Like, it's pretty easy for you and me to be in conversation because we agree on a lot, and we respect each other enough that when we disagree, we can disagree, and still be adults and understand each other and not try to change each other. The real test is when we bump into somebody who's 180 degrees or even 90 degrees opposed to where we are, and to still maintain that integrity and that welcoming and that openness to another perspective, not necessarily agreeing with it or acquiescing to it, but being open to it and trying to understand it. And that's where the work really gets done, I think, in my experience. So that, those 3 sessions you were involved in, at the invitation of this Jewish organization, were, I think, a great example of that, an attempt to do that very thing. And then more specifically, encounter with the gentleman who was the executive director of the organization, who just really connected with you one-on-one and said, let me know how I can be of service. I mean, that's what we're looking for. So that's a great example. You should probably share that, like, every show, some snippet of it, because that's a great example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I've had, and I'm scheduled to have about 5 or 6 lunches from folks from the organization. And see, that's what they even took a poll, and what I said was the only type of people that should be invited are folks, and I say this particularly as it relates to Black people, mainly because the Jewish people that come already kind of exhibit this. They're coming with these kind of qualities. So why else would they be there, right? But the Blacks that come, and I say this, and I told them, because I said, you want to make sure that they have to come with 3 behavior characteristics that they want to do, committed to: connect, engage, and co-create. Okay. And they're not in that headspace, then they shouldn't be invited. Now there is a place and time for folks who want to come and vent about their pain and what they've been through, and they want to express the trauma and how they feel injustice has been done to them. And there is spaces and time for that, but that's not what these sessions were. These sessions were designed for folks to look for, let's stop living in the past, but let's focus on the future. Right? That's where we want to put our thoughts on. Because if we start talking about the past, then, as Viktor Frankl talks about, no one's trauma is worse than the next person's trauma. You can think that it is. You can say, someone broke in your house and they raped you, or they raped your family, but they didn't necessarily kill them. And another person says, well, no, they broke in my house, raped my family, and killed my family, so my trauma is worse. You can debate that. And it's like, what do you win if you do win that argument? The point of the matter is when you want to look at how can we go forward, what can we do to change what's going to happen? Because if we don't, we see that generationally, society is trying to, and I say the media is trying to push us further into our tribes based on our race, based on our gender, based on our sexual orientation, based on our ethnicity and our religious dogma, you know. And when you begin to see yourself as a human being and you don't let yourself get put in those different categories, and then you operate around a bigger umbrella, which I advocate spiritual capitalism. Because he asked me this, he said, "So let me ask you a question for your movement that you're advocating around real estate. How do you choose people to be a part of your program?" So that's a great question.
Hmm.
I said, for me now is people have to exhibit the behavior characteristics of spiritual capitalism, not necessarily call themselves that, but at least servitude, servant leadership, growth perspective mindset, grateful spirit. They have to exhibit at least those kind of qualities if they're going to be a part of the movement. Because regardless of the skin color and the fact that they may need the product, the question is, do they deserve it? And that's what I look for. And I said it's a big difference between need and deserve, right? Need, everybody needs money. Well, if you don't go work for it, then you really don't deserve it. You know, it's not going to just come because of the fact is the need is there. And that's what I think that I really want to begin to use the spiritual capitalism movement that I'm advocating for to show folks that there are people who are going to come in alignment and build relationships, what I call connection intelligent tribes, under the umbrella because they have alignment. Like you and I have things in alignment. We might not necessarily have a lot of things in common. Like I don't think we talked about what we actually do have in common. You know, like for example, our interest in movies. I don't really know what your interest in movies may be. Your interest in music may be. Your interest in what you eat may be. You know, all those things. How you dress. I know that we like basketball. I know that's one thing we may have in common.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But the point of the matter is, I believe the alignment is the strongest connector because it's intrinsic to who we are as individuals, and it speaks to our core and our soul and our spirit. Where in common, just I can like basketball. Like I used to be a football fan. I don't like football at all anymore.
Hmm.
I'm not even really entertained that you try to keep up with football for a variety of reasons. But 10 years ago, I loved football, so we would have had that in common. So that's just kind of what I want to go with that as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, starting with where you left off that, and we return to this frequently in our conversations, and I don't think we should ever stop returning to it. That idea of alignment with someone as opposed to what we have in common is really a big deal. I'm not going to repeat it because I agree with everything you just said there. But I do want to return to what you said about trauma. Again, I agree, and I want to just take it to another step into it. I'm currently reading Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. He's a
Mm.
Canadian MD. He's got to be 77 or 78 years old now, and he wrote a book. His book on addiction was called "In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts." His book on stress-related illness was called "When the Body Says No." He's a brilliant guy who uses his own addictions and failures as examples in his writing. And he said specifically in the new book, and I'm only about 35 pages into it, but he has said this consistently that the idea of comparing traumas, it's like it's just stupid. I mean, he didn't say stupid, but it just doesn't make any sense. And specifically because all of these trauma specialists, Bessel van der Kolk and Mate and Peter Levine and others, they're all really clear that the trauma that they're talking about isn't the event. It's not the explosion. It's not the rape. It's not the murder. It's not the neglect, whatever it is. It's the residue in the body of the survivor. That's the trauma. So in other words, not that it doesn't matter what the event was, but the trauma is not the facts of the event, but it's what we carry physiologically, emotionally, intellectually, fully humanly in all the pieces of our humanity is what we carry forward. And none of us has any business saying, well, what I'm carrying is worse than what you're carrying. So you're just, spot on with that. And I'm just putting the asterisks. I said, so, yeah, so Levine and Mate and Van der Kolk and all these people who have made great contributions to the body of what we know about trauma nowadays for the last 40 years plus, agree with you. So it's, yeah. Oh, you suffer, the response needs to be something like, oh, yeah, you suffer too. I know I suffer and you suffer too. Um, how can we help each other? How can we be in conversation together? Because what we've done historically, and this gets back to what you and I have been talking about, is when historically, beginning with the Europeans who came to what we now call the Americas and continuing in what we now call the Americas, historically, what cultures have done when they've bumped into another unfamiliar culture was rather than say, oh, wow, something different. What can we learn from each other? They said something like, oh, something different. Let's subjugate it, use it, and try to make it more like us. And that was primarily done in the United States by, the British. It was done in Central and South America by the Portuguese and the Spanish, to a lesser degree the French, and the French did it in Canada. And we continue to do that. I mean, men have done it to women and continue to in many ways. Heterosexuals do it to those who are gay and lesbian. Cisgendered folks do it to those who are, have different sexual preferences or identities, I should say, or lack of a specific sexual identity. And there's this constant othering, and then attempting to make the other more like the dominant culture. And if you have bigger guns or more money, you do that. And that's the work we have to do, is stopping anyone who sees someone or something that's different and tries to subjugate it, say, okay, that's not good enough, you need to be more like us. And that's in a snapshot, in a real brief overview, that's the problem that we've been speaking about. This recognition of something different rather than curiosity and a shared learning. We try to, whoever's dominant or stronger or perceived to be stronger tries to change the other. And often it's been done in the name of, historically, of a monarchy or a religion. And nowadays it's done in the name of a preferential approach to economics or government, specifically capitalism and democracy. I mean, so the Vietnam story was, okay, we need to insert democracy there to stop the spread of communism. That didn't go well because it's hard to insert democracy, if you think about what democracy means, from the outside at the point of a gun. Like, by definition, democracy isn't imposed on others using violence from outside. That's not what it is. Now, it's easy to say that in hindsight, looking back at history, but the men who perpetrated, the war in Vietnam on behalf of the states weren't stupid. I mean, most of them were Harvard educated, the primary architects, not all of them. And, but they were locked into a worldview that said, we just defeated fascism and Nazism in World War II. And we have an obligation now to make the world safe for democracy and spread democracy, meaning that they were perpetrating their own version of, we know what's right and we're going to insert it on you, which is effectively what Hitler did. Now, I'm not comparing, democratic, a democratic republic, which the United States has a government, to what the Nazis did. Anybody listening to this, don't say I'm doing that, because I'm not. But the move that we made was very similar. Okay, we have a big military now. We're going to go in there, get rid of the folks who want to be communists, and insert democratic leadership. It doesn't work, and there's a history to prove that it doesn't work. So,
And also I believe that another one of the reasons why it doesn't work is because America has the ideal of America sounds great, but then we look at the fact that America doesn't practice what it preaches. It's like you saying democracy is great, but then I look at your country, and at that time there was, clearly how they marginalized and racial oppression of Black people. So it's like you can't come to my country and try to tell me how to live my life. It's like me looking at you and saying, well, I'm a vegan. I'm going to come into your home and say, stop eating meat. Vegan is a better way. But then at the same time, I verbally abuse my wife and I'm not there for my kids. And it's like, well, why would I want to? Yeah, vegan, sounds good, from the context. I see the health benefits of it, but your behaviors that you show along as a vegan doesn't, so that incentivize me to even want to look up your lifestyle or adopt your different ideology or political ideology. And see, that's what America to me never really understood. It still doesn't understand to this day. It's like we go on and we advocate for government to change on the idea that America stands for, but the actual reality that people deal with here in America is totally different than the actual ideal. But that's where, we as citizens, we have the ability to make that ship get better with each generation. That's one of the greatest things we have in this country, is the ability to say we can make these comments public like we're doing, and hopefully, plant seeds and begin to make the ship correct. But I have a question I wanted to ask you, and the question is kind of centered on, before you wrote the book, before you did the research to get the book that we were talking about, would you say that post writing a book, did it help you become more empathetic to understanding the plights of the Native American women, Blacks? Did it help you become more empathetic in the data and the research that you gathered?
Yeah. So great question. So my best sense of that, I haven't, I'm thinking of it as I'm trying to, think back. My best sense, my most honest answer in this moment to that question is, I think the empathy that I felt was my motivation for writing the book, doing the research. What the research and writing did for me was really clarify and deepen my sense of how egregious what I kind of already knew had been. When I really got into the aspects of the women of history, the history of women, in the U.S., the history, the nuts and bolts of what really happened with every treaty that the U.S. federal government signed with Native Americans, the nuts and bolts of specific stories from the time of enslavement through Jim Crow, and then continuing into the role that African Americans played in the U.S. military, in the Civil War, in World War I, and World War II, in Vietnam, and even in Afghanistan and Iraq, and still the racism that still exists in the U.S. military, and with the asterisk that there are really good people doing great things to change that. So what I came away with was, I don't know if my empathy increased. I hope maybe it did, but I came away with a deeper understanding of the individual lives that were impacted and how they were impacted by this history. So maybe my empathy was deepened, but I did the work because of the empathy that existed before I did the work. So I don't know if that if I really addressed your question there, but
No, it
yeah,
does. You answered my question. And the reason I asked that question was primarily because, again, I go back to the whole growth minded characteristic I look for.
yeah,
Like, I give you an example of what I mean. Now, growing up as a child, I learned about Anne Frank, and
yeah.
you heard that, and that's horrible. And I never had any ill feelings toward the Jewish people, but reading Viktor Frankl's book deepened my empathy. And I want to say, I'm not saying, nor was I implying you were not empathetic prior to the research,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but it's just that you get to understand it differently and you see it from a different perspective based off getting more data and having your mind being open to learning is where I'm going with this. Like, when you begin to do your research, did you approach it from a context? And I know you didn't, but I give you a chance to, address it anyway. That your ego is telling you, I already know a lot of this information. I just maybe not know all the facts, and I maybe not point out the details and
Mm.
specific incidents, but I kind of know the overall situation. And there's nothing new to learn here. It's just that I want to make sure I organize the facts in a certain way to allocate or make my argument that I'm actually going to put the forth in the book. But you also were open-minded enough to say that, wow, this new information I am getting kind of gives me a different perspective, a different way to look at it, a different way to maybe empathize with what this person was saying prior to that. Do you get what I'm saying? Is that making any sense?
Oh, it definitely does, and I got lots of new information. So I had a superficial layman's knowledge of history based on my formal education and other things I had read. But when I went after these specific topics, again, women, Native Americans, African Americans, Vietnam, and post 9/11 wars, I learned a lot of new information. And what I want to introduce and to answer the question, even this is the main thing that research did for me. And I don't think you and I have spoken about this in probably a few months, but early in the book, I quote Rabbi Mark Gelman, who spoke at the Yankee Stadium memorial service for first responders on September 23rd, 2001, after the towers came down. And it was a memorial service that was open to the families and colleagues and friends of the first responders, the firefighters, paramedics, police officers who died on September 11th when the towers came down. And there were lots of speakers that day, but Mark Gelman spoke specifically and really clearly saying that on that day, and they thought 6,000 people had died. He said on that day, 6,000 people did not die. On one person died 6,000 times. Then he went on to just say more about that. So what I tried to do in the book, and this is where the research really helped me perhaps be more, really engage with empathy, is I wanted to understand, to the extent that it's possible, what it was like for this woman who was born in 1797. I'm just making up some things now. This African American who was born into slavery, maybe in Georgia or somewhere, or this African who was kidnapped, taken from her family, or this Vietnamese person, or this Vietnamese. So in other words, one person at a time, because that's how we live our lives. So that's what the research really helped me do. And I tried to translate it into the book, because we kind of take these sweeping moves. Now just under 3,000 people died on September 11th. That's what we say now. But no, one person died just under 3,000 times on that day. 3 million people were enslaved in the United States. No, one person was enslaved 3 million times. And let's take one of those. Think about what that means, that somebody was enslaved, all right? Or somebody was forced to move west of the Mississippi River by the Indian Removal Act in 1830. Or, you know, pick one. Because it's just like, you know, you and I are talking, and you're an individual with a history and a life. I'm an individual with a history and a life. All of these larger historical stories impacted one person at a time. They impacted large groups, yeah, but one person at a time suffered. And that's part of what I tried to convey in the book. And had I not heard Rabbi Mark Gelman, I watched that thing live on September 23rd. You know, because I was living 70 miles from the trade center, I guess, give or take 70 or 80 miles. So I was really interested in it. Had I not heard him speak, I don't know if I would have that perspective to this day. You know, maybe I would. I'd like to think I would have learned it somewhere else. But that was like, there were a lot of good speakers. And if they were given awards that day, I mean, he was getting, you know, the gold medal. He was in first place because he just spoke in a way that nobody else came close to. And that's not in any way to disparage the other speakers, as to kind of hold him up as just a really powerful message bringer, I thought. So that's the thing that for the rest of my life, I want to remember, that there are these sweeping generalizations we use, and they're convenient and useful at times, but history and major events impact one person at a time. Whether it's the next school shooting or the last school shooting, or what's going on in the House of Representatives right now in the U.S. Congress, you know, there's all these individual lawmakers and prospective lawmakers. You know, one from New York who's a complete fraud, who made up his entire biography, which is amazing. And he's going to get sworn in as a leader in the United States. So it's one life at a time. And obviously this, you know, gentleman, who I'm not even going to say his name, he didn't think his life was worthy enough to run for office. So he made up an entire life and got caught and still got elected. So you know, that's the piece I think that's the empathy I think we all need. Your life, my life, his life, her life, their life over there. That's the sense of empathy we really need. Another with 200 plus bones, you know, if we're lucky enough, to a couple of eyes, a couple of ears, a nose, a mouth, 32 teeth, give or take. That changes over the years.
Right.
You know, another creature just like me, not experientially, not in terms of how we look, but another human being. You know, what can I learn from this person, and how can I be of service, and, you know, how can we be in relationship together? I mean, that's what the book is trying to talk about.
And now that, and I know we're getting near the top of the hour, but I have one other quick question.
Yeah.
Now that you've written the book and you've had the opportunity now to begin to market the book, discuss the book in various different formats and mediums, would you say that the overall reception of people who've read the book is what you either A, hoped it would be, or B, is more of, I don't know what people would think. I'm just happy to get any feedback.
So for people who have read the book and have provided feedback, whether it's online, like somebody writes a review, or somebody has spoken to me personally, including both people who already knew me, people who, yeah, the reception has been very positive and in the vicinity of what I would hope for. You know, the problem I'm facing is that this is the United States of America in the third decade of 21st century. And a lot of people aren't interested in reading a book that has 360 approximately pages of text, you know, 100 plus, you know, 80 some odd pages of endnotes, and then another X number of pages of bibliography and an appendix. Because people want immediate gratification. They want to read, you know, a limited number of characters on Twitter. We don't have, so interestingly, taking the essence of the book and writing a shorter version of it without the endnotes, but covering the same ground without all of the differences. and seeing if there's a publisher interested in that. That's been done at least once before with a book that I'm familiar with. So I'm thinking about that. But so far, to answer your question directly, yes. Anyone who's read it need to, write about it online or, review it or whatever. Option has been good. Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean from a context of critique. I meant more from a context of thought-provoking discussion.
Yeah. So thank you for that clarification. So my answer to that is I don't know. A few people who I know personally have said to me they were grateful for the book because it gave them the same deepening that the research gave me. Like they kind of knew the history of women, they kind of knew the history of slavery and African Americans or Native Americans, and they kind of knew about the Vietnam War, but the book took them to a deep level. So yeah, it seems as though that has happened as well. That there and then the connection of all those in terms of the American shadow, because that's what the book is talking about. The shadow appears, this denial piece appears throughout all of those separate but not really separate histories. It's just the repetition of the same dynamic in different times, with different groups in American history. So.
Well, we've reached a point where I believe it's time to look at what from a lessons learned from the various different chapters you describe in the book, the male, the female energies. What do you see as possible ways that folks can take that information and now begin to continue to explore ways to become more fully human?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with. I'm not sure if I've used this one before, but it's useful. So if I'm repeating myself, that's okay. Just a simple question, which is directly related to shadow. This is a regular practice for me. What might I be missing, or what might I not be seeing that's available for me to see? Great question for growth. Doesn't matter what your level of education is, who you are, what you do, how you are. It applies to everybody. I'm missing. So I would recommend that as a regular practice, not from the standpoint of, oh, I'm not a good person, I didn't realize this, oh, I'm terrible, but just from a standpoint, as you like to say, King, growth, a learning mindset. What might I be missing is a great question to ask if you're really a learner. So that would be the place I would, or the perspective I would point to today.
Absolutely. And still continue with our tradition of identifying one person per show who we feel either past or present that exhibits the fully human behavior characteristics. You have anybody in mind that you want to start the year off with?
I actually do, and it's not one individual person. It's kind of a composite of real people. So I refer to it as the contemporary American hero. And what I mean by that is anybody who gets up in the morning throughout this country, and we're speaking about the US, so I'm going to keep it in the US, who just gets up, they have kids, they take care of their kids, they have a job, they get to their work, and they just get up every day and they do what has to be done in a way that does more good than harm for their family, their community, their workplace, and the country at large. Anybody who does that across disciplines, jobs, industries, who just gets up and makes the world a little bit better how they are every day, that's my version of who I'm really pointing to as an example of being fully human. And there are millions of them. They don't get into the news because money-based news reporting only likes to point to sensationalism and the worst case scenario. But all of the countless everyday heroes who just do the basic things they need to do every day to move the conversation forward in a good, positive way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said this person before, but if I did, then I'm going to say it again. So I want to repeat myself with this because I believe this person deserves that and many more other accolades and um, recognition. That is Viktor Frankl.
Hmm.
And I mention that because, again, in reading this book, I think Man's Search for Meaning is not a book that you just read once and put down and say, well, yeah, I read it. It's a book that requires daily study because the concepts that he talks about in the book are so deep that it's sometimes they don't hit you until you're going through certain situations. And then the book is there as a reference point to help you see things. And what I'm speaking about is particular is the fact that for him to go through such a horrific event of watching his wife get killed or his friends, folks he's occupied with, just get totally um, beaten down mentally, physically, starved, made to do horrific acts, and then eventually murdered at an atrocious level. For him to come out of that and then say that I found meaning,
Hmm.
that to me is something that's incredible. And like I said, for me, that's something I aspire to be able to walk through that trauma, that trial of fire, so to speak, and always begin to peel back the onion to get to the layers. Again, Norman Vincent Peale once said that if you take any problem and you pull back enough of the layers, there's a blessing in that problem, right? But you just got to have that mindset to believe that actually it's true. And Viktor Frankl, to me, has demonstrated that and is a testament to show folks that no matter how bad it may seem, because this is a person who went through that, to still walk out there with a positive perspective on life and to become more fully human as a result of something horrific like that. That's the example that I believe we can all learn and appreciate and model our lives after.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I mean, beautifully stated and in context. If he can do it in that situation, yeah, amen. I won't even finish that sentence. It's like there's an example for you. Yeah.
Well, this concludes our first episode of the new year 2023 of Fully Human Connections. We definitely, as you said before, we've gone through a lot, discussed quite a bit, and I look forward to the infinite possibilities that this year is going to bring us and what we're going to learn on this journey of continuing this discovery to become more fully human and get connected with not only ourselves, but with each other as we pursue it. So, again, thank you, Reggie, for your investment of time and energy and commitment to always being present, being a 10, and being willing to share. And I want to thank our listening audience for those who do listen, whether it's today or you listen to this as a recording. We want to thank you for tuning in and continuing to listen to our suggestions and hopefully get in alignment with us as we all pursue the path to become fully human. And until next Wednesday, I wish everybody a blessed and productive day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, King.